Thanks for a great few days and much appreciated, and looking forward to sort of closing off a little bit with you. And Pedro and myself, we've promised to combine. We can't promise to synchronize because we haven't had an enormous amount of time to sort of to put anything too slick together. But we've had some good conversation, and we think we can have some good conversation with you this morning. I just want to spend my 15 or so minutes in closing off from yesterday. There were a couple of things we didn't get to in the end, and I thought it would be helpful to get to those. Two things people asked me about to follow up on. All the mothers in the room asked me how my son was. The one who asked me about fun and joy, they said, is he okay? He's fine. He's fine. In fact, we started a conversation about 5 or 6 years ago, and we've stayed in that conversation with each other. It's been a real blessing. It's been a real blessing. You know, his question had wisdom in it for me, his question had wisdom in it for him, and his question has had wisdom in it for us. Many of the sort of wrong turns I had been taking in terms of my own balance and joyfulness, I've managed to do something about in the last 6 years. So thank you for asking about him. He's fine. The second thing that people asked me about was narrative clarity. I think I mentioned the importance. When times are confused, people who tell the story well are like gold. Leaders who attend to telling the story well are really, really powerful, even more powerful interregnum between great stories than they often are when we're really clear on the story. And the world is moving from analog to digital. The world is moving from all sorts of places. The sort of face of the new isn't clear yet, but we know something is dying. We know something is being let go, and we're not that clear yet what's coming. And in that interregnum, in that space between great stories, people who tell story well are really important. And your job as leaders, in many ways, is as best you can to find that narrative clarity. Just to offer you Patrick Lencioni's 6 questions. He says basically, Lencioni writes for business, but he writes about teams as well. And in the book called The Advantage, he said, essentially, the elevator test for our businesses, for our organizations, for our schools is that we can essentially have reasonable consensus on these 6 questions. Why are we here as a school? Like, what's the big purpose of our school? How does our school make the world a better place? If we weren't here, so what? So it's a very big why. Now, he asked this question of businesses. How then should we behave? Under that purpose, what would be our ethical framework? And it's been talked about a lot in the last couple of days. What would we need to expect from each other, offer each other? What would the contract be? Then the smaller why. What is it that we do? Why are we here? What is our work? You know, the actual technical, pedagogical, educational curriculum. What is our work? What's the core of our work? And then one that I find schools find more difficult to answer in the era when we're trying at times to reduce the story to numbers. When are we successful? What does it look like when we're great, when we do things really well? When I work with sports teams, they get very, very short, sharp sets of data and metrics. We find that a bit harder. Some of our horizons are a lot further out. So when do our people party? Because if they don't party, if they don't feel that they're successful, what you do is set up the most demotivational circumstance for people to work in, which is not knowing that they are making progress at anything that matters. If the people don't know that they're making progress at anything that matters, because we never stop to tell them that, we never stop to actually celebrate that, what we basically ask people to do is to shackle themselves in every morning and to trudge through treacle. It's great to be here, but haven't we got the best job in the world? We need to know when we're successful. And then 2 slightly more operational pieces of clarity at the bottom, but critical nevertheless. And often I find these 2 missing in places that don't know where they're going. The people who are in the Sydney to wherever race. What's most important right now, this term, this year, this week? And who needs to be doing what? People need that operational clarity too. So if you're comfortable, as you sit there and read those, they're simple questions. The words are not rocket science. If you're comfortable that your place would answer those with some consistency, you're in reasonably good narrative space. The elevator test is okay. And if you find one of those, you think, gosh, I could give you the big why, I can give you the third one, I can give you the ethical framework, but I can't tell you success looks like. I can tell you what the government think it looks like. I can tell you what maybe some parts of the school, but I can't really tell you what success looks like. Well, there's some work there. And if we're muddled at the bottom, what we want in schools is not just action, we want direction. Like we want the action directed. So that's narrative clarity in a simple frame. There are lots of other ways of looking at it, but hopefully as you read those through, you can make some good personal meaning from them. So let's just look at the last two. What I tried to outline yesterday was from a sort of a phenomenological point of view, from a field note point of view, as I look at leaders who are standing up and not throwing up in these times, what sorts of characteristics? Now, I don't want it to sound like a recipe, and I don't want you to beat yourself up over these 9 points. But the cluster of these, there's a pattern in the cluster of these that I see in most of these leaders, and I think it's worth us looking at. And so I want to just talk to you about the last two. And Bob has already really segued beautifully and probably said more eloquently what I'm going to say anyway. I find that most of the time, these leaders have appreciative mindsets. They're able to switch off their evaluative mindsets. You know, one of the things that stops smart people from learning is our tendency to evaluate other people and situations too quickly. Smart people find it hard to turn off their evaluation. You could be evaluating me now. Probably are. And that can get in the way of just experiencing people and experiencing the place. And I find, and it's not either or again, there's a bridge here, there's a dichotomy here that good leaders seem to be able to span. I find that good leaders, in an 80-20 sense, spend the 80 in appreciation and the 20 in evaluation. Not the other way around, guys. Not the 80 in evaluation and the 20 in appreciation. Sort of tacked on, and by the way, I like you. Not that. And by the way, there's more we can do. That's okay. So support and challenge in an 80-20 balance, roughly. Where are your eyes drawn? An appreciative mindset, our eyes will be drawn towards the things that are happening well, towards the positive deviance in our school. Positive deviance, a dangerous thing to say in schools, but, to those things that are going well, to those reasons to affirm people. And not so quickly drawn to the lower pencil all the time. Covey said it beautifully in the eighth habit, that leadership is always about communicating to people their worth and potential so clearly that they come to see it in themselves. Leaders grow leaders, we said that yesterday. But it's about communicating to people their worth and their potential so clearly that they come to see it in themselves. Every great leader that I've seen working is surrounded by leaders. Saplings sometimes, not necessarily huge, not necessarily fully developed, but growing. A forest of leadership growing up around them because they're secure enough and they're generous enough to allow other people their space. I think it was Scott Peck said it back in the 70s when he said, if you want to know where you're loved, it's a big word to use in a professional setting. If you want to know where you're loved, ask yourself, where are you biggest? Because love calls us out. Love allows us out. Love gives us the conditions to grow in. And sometimes other things cause us to shrink and to end up as bonsai versions of our true selves. We don't want our leadership to be turning out bonsai leaders or bonsai teachers. We want our leadership to be turning out flourishing people who are big enough for the complexity of the task and who are big enough to support us in the complexity of the task we have in front of us. Leadership, when it stands up, manages to find both the now and the next. Both the now What's great with you? And the next. And where can we go? It doesn't just keep pushing people into the next. Your people need to know that they're already good. So, I do lots of work in crucial conversation. And one of the provocations I sometimes ask is, how often do you plan a crucial conversation just to tell someone that they're great? Not as an intro, 2 stars and a wish. Not as an intro, here's what you need to do better. But to sit down and to skillfully and intentionally say, I want to meet with, and I want to tell him what I've seen this week that has made my heart leap, that has reminded me of why we come to do this work. It doesn't have to take long. 2 or 3 minutes. 2 or 3 minutes to tell someone that you've seen them, that you've appreciated them, and then put a full stop at the end of that, not a comma. It doesn't have to take long. The noises in my head bothering anybody else? Okay. And finally, that was 6. We skipped 7. We did 7 and 8 yesterday. Finally, number 9. I find they pay a great deal of attention. They understand that our schools are energy systems. We're all energy systems. Like, we have a health program for principals in Western Australia. Some of the guys, I'm not sure if I can see them here, but some of the guys who are here this week with us are on our Experienced Principals program. And we put a health coach and we do some health testing and we put some mindset coaching and some genuine work into making sure people can get better health outcomes from themselves. Our schools are energy systems. And we as principals, and when we sang together, we had a great example of someone orchestrating human energy. A thing that wasn't there before emerged through their skill. And a leader, in many ways, orchestrates the human energy of their school. They pay attention. They professionalize health. They professionalize their own health. And they professionalize the health of others. I had a great example last week in New Zealand of 2 young leaders who bounced up to me at the break in a day I was doing with schools. Their principal wasn't there. These were 2 young assistant principals. And they said, we have a great leader. And I said, oh, great, tell me about her. I was going to meet her the next day. The principals were coming in the next day. And they told me about her and they said, she does expect us to work very hard. I said, that's great. And I said, do you have the energy for that? Yeah, we do. But you know what the principal has told us? That 3 times a year, each of us can ring her and say, I'm too well for work today. Have you heard that one? I'm too well to come to work today. I need to go to the beach. I need to do something else. In the way we use language sometimes, we call a wellness day when you're sick. When you have a family crisis, it's sort of a wellness day. I'm too well for work today. Now, obviously, scale that up to the whole staff and we're in trouble. But for these 2 young leaders who she knows day after day after day go beyond what's expected of them and are in it in the evenings and supporting all sorts of things in the school, she has given them permission, just quietly, and I'm not sure if it's known necessarily in the school. She said, just a couple of times a year, if you need to, give me a call and say, hey, I'm just too well to come to work today. I want to take my kids to, whatever. And I just, there are little ways that we can do that. There are ways we can do that, all of us. We can focus on the place and focus on its energy, focus on our own energy, and actually drive some good outcomes for our people through that. One of the things a lot of these guys are doing is they're getting past, they're helping people with the digital boundary. The digital boundary is a disaster for a lot of people now. It's a disaster for a lot of us. Where, work and home, all that boundary seems to have collapsed. And the phenomenon that Sherry Turkle and other writers in the digital space talk about is, what are the cognitive consequences of people who feel like they're always on? We're learning in our program on health that you do emotional labor. It's a particular kind of labor that you do. Like, it's technical professional labor, but it's also emotional labor. You often stand alongside families at their worst moments. You stand along staff at their worst moments. You stand along students in all sorts of circumstances. And the only thing that decompresses you from emotional labor, the only thing that restores you when you're doing emotional labor is what they call thoughts free from work. Is having spaces that give you thoughts free from work. And obviously the implications of the digital collapse of boundary are that many people now don't get thoughts. They can be on a beach at work, trudging along thinking about all the other things they have to do. They can be sitting at home like the captain of the Starship Enterprise, managing their workspace and watching the TV and thinking they're relaxing. Thoughts free from work are the only thing that will give you breaks and space from emotional labor. Now, it won't be the same thing for all of you. For me, hitting golf balls on a driving range gives me thoughts free from work. For others, it'll be lots of different things, but we have to find it. And the question for you, do you have thoughts free from work? Do you have enough of it? And do you allow that in your people? So what, in a sense, work will always be sacrificed. I'm not a great believer in balance, because it sort of suggests to me a static state of like a swami. I'm so balanced. You know, bring me your problems. That's not what I see. But I see people who are good at balancing. You know, balancing, pulling themselves back towards, and then I'll fall. And you know, the present moment is a knife edge between the past and the future. We're always slipping off. We're always slipping off. We're always slipping out of balance. But balancing is interesting. And work will always have sacrifice in it. But if your sacrifice is ongoing and you don't build renewal into your cycle, you've got no recovery time. If your people are always in sacrifice and never have renewal, they will never have recovery time. And you will have, as the minister said, great teachers, but they can't stay great for long enough because the sustainability of their greatness is the issue. You know, our schools run on goodwill. They run on discretionary effort. They run on the things people don't have to do. They run on engagement, not compliance. And if we can't create healthy space for our teachers, our schools can't be healthy. And hurt people. All that comes back into the classroom, because standing in front of the child is someone who's not well. Doesn't matter how good their pedagogy is, they're not well. So I don't know what you think you could do yourselves to prevent people from being always on. Are there ways that you can do, that you can afford, that you can imagine, that give people that sense of space? I think it's a disaster for parents to be able to contact staff after hours on email. Personal opinion, and I'm sure it's a policy in lots of schools. To me, that's a disaster. And I think we should put boundary in there for our staff. I think our parents would accept that the very thing that they're worried about, their children, the staff have the right to be worried about too, their children. And I think we need to create digital boundaries for our staff. But I think we need to find healthy things to do with, healthy ways to be with our staff in other ways as well. Like being playful, like laughing, like having fun. And celebration doesn't always mean a party. It just means playfulness. It means celebration. It means affirmation. So in broad terms, my presentation really to you has been that I think leadership with an open hand is more sustainable than leadership with a closed hand. You know, the energy it takes to keep your hand open is less anyway than the energy it takes to keep your hand closed. And while in a crisis, compliant, standard-driven leadership is necessary, in broad terms, I think the world is trying to have a different conversation about leadership. It's trying to say, can we just open our hands and risk a bit more, trust a bit more, and see what our people are really feeling and really thinking and really capable of. And so in broad terms, I think the leadership literature is leaning in the way of a more open hand as a default setting. Look at the CEO of Google Australia. You know, this is not just turning up in education. When asked, what's the best advice you were ever given, she says, think about how you would lead differently if you're leading an army of volunteers. If you had to take their hearts with you all the time, how would you lead differently? And I mean, it's a really salutary question. You know, and if that's going to work in these progressive, front-edge, digital, cutting-edge spaces, I think we can learn something from that too. How would your principalship be different if your teachers were there by choice? How much more time would we need to spend in inquiry rather than in advocacy, in persuading and in shared visioning rather than saying, come follow me? A vision that's not shared could well be a hallucination, right? So the idea that you can float up onto a hill somewhere or come back from a conference with a new vision, no one's saluting that flag anymore. In broad terms, and I use the magic line a lot in my coaching, in broad terms, what Kieran's question told me was, Brendan, our dad, really, you can easily get trapped in bed in life, in blaming, excusing, and denying. It's not where high-performing people spend their time, in blaming, excusing, and denying, in bed. It's all happening to me. It's all happening to me, and there's nothing I can do about it. That's victim thinking. High-performing mindset takes us above the line to, what do I own here? You know, Covey's circle of influence. What do I need to accept? Where's my influence? What can I change? And what am I able to give a response to? So the high-performing person, you at your best, get out of bed and you pick up the oars. It's no accident that mindful leadership, the literature on mindful leadership has gone through the roof. Because we're turning to this now and asking about, what does it mean to be mindful? Can you be mindful in a leader? Or do you have to be forced into events management, into the trivia, the administrivia of groundhog school days? And there's just two commitments that are platform to mindful leadership. I'll take them out of Chapman's book. He says the first thing that the first thing that mindful leaders do is they take radical responsibility for their own reality. And if you put that above and below the line, that's what the commitment looks like. I commit to taking full responsibility for the circumstances of my life and for my physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. And I commit to supporting that for other people as well. I am not going to be a villain, a victim, a villain, or a hero who takes responsibility for other people's lives if I can help them to take more responsibility for themselves. Do you have a habit of rescuing people from their own growth? Do any of your leaders who you work with have a habit of rescuing people from their own growth and their own solutions? It's long-term unsustainable. You're going to end up with a bag. I mean, you're going to be needed. But they're not getting stronger. And the second platform issue for mindful leaders is that they shift their stance. They shift their source of their stance in front of people from judging to being curious. To learn, I want to learn through curiosity. I want to be curious again about why my school is the way it is and what sort of leverage we have to make it great. And there's the commitment on the line again. When you're below that line, it's about being right and certain. And we live in VUCA. We live in uncertain times. So you're going to have a lot, like Dr. Phil would say to you, how's that going to go for you? There isn't that certainty, that clarity. The world is VUCA. The world is volatile. It's uncertain. It's complex, and it's ambiguous. So the provocation again, do you have a tendency to have an over-evaluative mindset in your leadership? Do you make people feel judged? Do you make people feel judged? Even when you don't mean to. I'll finish off with a couple of thoughts on noticing. What I found when I started, and again, Bob has said it beautifully this morning, when I started to look at this notion of joy, that it wasn't about getting, it was about giving. Happiness can't be pursued well. It must ensue. It follows living. It's not something you chase. It's something that comes in when you do certain things as well as you can. And the art of noticing well, it's not that joy isn't already around us, it's that we sometimes don't notice it. You know, Brian Keenan, the young teacher who was kidnapped by Hezbollah, he was kept in a cell for 1.5 years. And they fed him the same sort of rubbish every day and spoke to him very little. And one day a guard put an orange on his tray, and he cried for the color, orange. And he cried for the taste of an orange. You know, there's oranges around us all the time, but we don't necessarily have the eyes to see it. The people around us are already in great space in lots of ways. Do we have the eyes to see it? It's not about new stuff all the time. It's about noticing what's already here. The alternative, guys, you know, you can live all sorts of lives, and a somber place to finish, maybe, but not really, because we don't have to go there. Bronnie Ware's book on the top 5 regrets of the dying, palliative care, putting the pattern together from people who are looking back on their lives before they pass over. And look what they're saying. I wish I'd allowed myself to be happier. Too late, I realized that I had more say in happiness than I thought. I wish I'd allowed myself a little bit more happiness, because it would have been better for me and for everyone around me. Joy. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. They were always there for me. I often wasn't there for them. I was too busy. My friends and my family, I didn't initiate what they needed, the contact. I wish I'd had the courage to say how I felt more. I kept too much inside. I even kept love inside, and respect inside, and praise inside. And maybe the people should have heard more from me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Spent too long making a living and not enough of my life making a life. You know, make a life as well as a living. And the top regret of the dying, you know, paradoxically on the bottom of the list, I wish I'd had the courage to stand up and live the life that was true to what I knew to be necessary and possible and true for me, and not settle so much for the life that everybody else expected of me. You know, we're here to do something. We're each here to do something. We have signature gifts, we have signature space. And I wish I'd had the courage to stand up in my signature space, in my times with my people, in my place, and actually do something that was bigger, that was bigger, that was better. You know, we don't have to go there. Thanks very much, guys.